Buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Vamos a comenzar este último seminario que cierra el ciclo de los seminarios Multiuri, es el tercero. Esta vez lo vamos a hacer en inglés porque contamos con 3 ponentes que son extranjeras y hemos pensado que el inglés, bueno, podía ser una lengua más fácil de entender para todo el público. Vamos a seguir tratando las cuestiones que venimos tratando en el ámbito del seminario Multiuri, cuestiones sobre racismo, cuestiones sobre discriminación. Yo solo unas breves palabras introductorias para dar las gracias a las 3 profesoras, sobre todo a la profesora María Gracia Santagati, que ha sido la encargada de organizar y coordinar este seminario, pero también a las 2 ponentes, Giulia Gilardoni y Valentina Fusari, por su amabilidad y por su disponibilidad para estar hoy aquí con nosotros y acompañarnos. Les dejo la palabra y, como siempre, después del seminario pues tendremos un turno de debate, de intercambio de ideas, etcétera. Muchas gracias y cuando quieras, Julia.
Muchas gracias, Ángeles. I try to speak in English, and I try not to mix English and Spanish. And welcome to this third seminar organized within the frame of the project Multiuri, that is racism and discrimination, human rights under threat. And I'm Maria Grazia Santagati, and as a researcher of the Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore and researcher of the CIRMIB, the Center of Initiative and Research of Migration in Brescia, in my university. I organized this workshop, this seminar, because I'm involved in this project. And this seminar follows the other 2 seminars, and the title of the seminar is "What is the place of racism in migration studies, from the colonial past to the present?" And the idea today is to try to organize and manage a dialogue between past and present, between also researchers of different disciplines, of different scientific point of view, and because we think that it's very important to mix our knowledge, our research, our studies, and try to understand this very spread and present phenomenon of racism. So we start from some questions. What is the place of racism in migration studies? But also, which are the functions played by racism in shaping the governance of migration and integration policies in Europe? And the idea is to discuss and develop two main issues. The first issue is that there is racism in some way is an underdeveloped issue among migration studies. And so there are a lot of studies about racism, there are a lot of studies about migration studies, but there is still a need to mix point of view, competencies, and to create a bridge among researchers that work on racism and on migration studies. Here there is a tempest. You can hear the rumor. And so the question is linked, the first question is linked to a sort of politic of knowledge I know the debate of the first and the second seminar already deal with this topic, no? About the role of researcher, about the choices, also the ethical choices of researchers, and we know that sometimes also researchers have difficulties to deal with racism, and to deepen this kind of topic. And there is also a sort of politic of denial sometimes, for example, in our country, in Italy, of denial of this phenomenon, and race and racism are a sort of taboo. So the idea is to reflect on the place of racism in our academy, but also in our studies and in our societies. And the other effort we can try to do with you in this seminar, discussing with a lot of experts on these topics, is to try to mix, to reflect on the present with a link with the past. Not only because there is a racism linked to the colonial inheritance, but also because we are not able to understand, but also to contrast and to do an effectiveness in our anti-racist activities if we do not connect the colonial past to the present. And so we try also to mix these two temporal perspectives to develop our debate today. And in this seminar, we, CIRMIB, I represent here, involved two researchers. And the first researcher is Guia Gilardoni. And Guia has worked with us with the Università Cattolica, and he had a PhD in sociology and social research methodology, but he is graduated in modern histories. And so you can understand this dialogue between history, social sciences, and humanities. And now she is an international research project manager at ISMU Foundation. Our experience is our experience of a research, but also of a practitioner in this field, because she has managed different Horizon 2020 project, considering in particular the activation, the bottom-up activation of civil society to contrast, to facilitate integration, to contrast racism. And now she is a member of the board of directors of the External Affairs Committee of the MISCOE, and she participates to the anti-racism working group. So she has a very interesting experience, practical, theoretical, and also she's a sort of activist in this field. And Guia is going to talk with us about the persistence and the continuity of racism, In particular, she tried to underline the persistence of the structural racism, of a situated racism in the governance of migration and of integration policies in our context in Europe and in Italy. So I give the floor to Guya, and then we can discuss about our contribution with the question in the chat, but also with the reflection. And you can write in Spanish or in English or in Italian, and we try to communicate in a different manner. Only a thing I have to remember to you that the seminar is recorded, so those who may not like to be recorded should turn off their cameras. And after the seminar, this registration is situated in the YouTube channel of the Multi-URI project. So we can have the chance of hear again. So, Guya, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria Grazia, for your nice words introducing me. And thanks to the organizer of this nice event. Happy to join because I think it is always very important to share our insights and knowledge on racism, which is a quite sensitive topic nowadays. Let me start sharing my presentation. And please let me know if you can see it. I guess, yes. Yeah. Okay, so yes, this is me. And I'm going to talk about the continuity of racism, because as Maria Grazia was saying in the introduction, the idea here is that if we give space, if we give room to racism in migration studies, probably we will have an advancement in our understanding of what is happening in relation to migration governance and the so-called migrant integration in our European context. Well, let me start saying that over the last 15 years, I've been committed to study international migration, the EU governance, and the so-called integration policies. And what emerged over this quite long time was the fact that I was coping with the emerging and increasing gap between what it is declared in terms of principles and what it is acted by the European and the national institutions. This gap has grown up significantly, leading to the well-known crisis of European values. In my presentation, I would start exactly for the crisis of European values. Then I would come into the situated racism, which is the way I like to look at racism, in order to highlight its continuity along history. And then I will go to the line of humanity and the social space of being and not being, that in my view are could be a perspective to answer the moral questions regarding the necropolitics we are acting now at the European and national levels. When I'm saying we, I am referring to we as European peoples, we as European institutions and national institutions. So it's a big we. And then I will conclude with possible answers to and the challenge to migration studies that, in my view, is exactly to bring and to give to race and racism as categories, as concepts, as lands the right place within migration studies. So let's start with the European values crisis. Well, over the years, we assisted to a progressive increasing of this gap between what was declared in principles and was acted in policy implementation. Initially, it was the shift on integration paradigm that was initially supposed to be institutional goals and then become to be a migrant burden, as it has been said in the SCORE systems or in the integration plans that have been adopted in several European member states. Then we have the growing number of deaths in the Mediterranean Sea. Not only in the Mediterranean, we also have other routes, but that is more visible. I'm referring to the crackdown on NGOs supporting migrants, that now it is renamed as a shrinking humanitarian space, which is indeed the result of the criminalization of solidarity, which is one of our funding principles stated also in the European Treaty. And we have rights respectless border management. And we have these no man's lands as refugee camps of Moria, for instance, in Greece, Europe. So my understanding of this, the attempt to understand this huge gap, this increasing gap, brought me to look at racism as a lens through which understanding this European values crisis. How I'm trying to do that. I start saying that I'm not providing any definition of racism. I would like start saying that racism is a long-standing cultural element in Europe that exists at least since 3 centuries, or even 4 if we consider its genesis. A long-standing cultural element based on the belief of an existing natural hierarchy among races and cultures, dividing human beings into superior and inferior. And all this started in a precise historical moment. It was during the Enlightenment. And it is what the so-called historical paradox of the Enlightenment, where exactly in the moment where we as a European were affirming the human rights and the highest principles in terms of equality, fraternity, at that time we confronted ourselves with the slave trade that was such a huge business on which the richness and the wealthy nation states were building their richness. And so we really needed at that time a moral legitimacy to morally allow us to exploit part of the humanity at our advantage, even if we were in the time affirming the universal rights. And that came the start of racism. That was the really initial phase of racism as we know it today. Because with the notion of race, we were able to separate part of the humanity, making them not fully entitled to be humans and not being entitled of human rights. Here comes the idea of situated racism. Widespread in every society, I consider racism in its situated forms. The intention here is to avoid, to represent racism as a natural human attitude. Like, yes, we are racist because of the fear we feel towards the others. No, I think that racism is an historical construct. And if we are able to catch it in specific times and space, will help us also to find the possible ways to hopefully overcome it. Situated races play different roles over times and places. It was against Jews, it was against Muslims, Roma, blacks, but all situated races has something in common, which is the logic on which it relies on. Different racisms have always the same identical logic, which is classify, separate, and then exclude. Exploiting and exterminate depends on the main goal ones want to achieve. So I assume that there are uncountable situated forms of racism. It always relies on this same binary logic of us and them. Well, the two extreme, us and them, changes over the time and spaces, but the dynamics remains the same over the time, dividing human beings along the line of humanity. The line of humanity is a concept that was firstly proposed by Frantz Fanon. In his, he was a psychiatric, so he was a great intellectual in the working in the Algerian colonial system, and in taking care of his patients, he outlined this idea of the line of humanity, in which the social space is divided into two. The line of humanity has been also called the line of colors by Webster Dubois, referring to the Afro-American situation in the United States, or to the abyssal line, for quoting Sousa Santos. But the important thing is that once the line is drawn, it is only a matter of fact who falls behind it. And recently, highlighted by Ramon Grosfoguel, who built up on Fanon's thinking, the line of humanity divides the social space in two, a part of being and a part of non-being. Those who are above the line are hyper-humanized, the superior being, and become the norm of the humanity, of what means to be human. Whoever is classified below this line is dehumanized, considered inferior being, closer to animals than to humans world, across the process of inferiorization. So in the social space of being are allowed all activities of human existence, like epistemology, like the way you organize culture, economics, all the form of social existence of humans. While in the being, while you are in the being zone, you are part of the good part. But in the other part, you are not allowed to have anything that normally relates to humanity. And Grosfoguel goes further in explaining that the zone of being is not homogeneous, of course. Let's take that we all live in the space of being, the social space of being. And we all know that inside this social space, we have conflicts. We have class, gender, sexual conflicts, religious conflicts. But even having conflicts, there is something that classifies these people living in the good part as part of the being zone social space. Everybody living in here, even the oppressed one, they live the oppression within race privilege. Their oppression is to some extent mitigated by the racial privilege. On the other hand, those in the zone of non-being live the same oppression but aggravated by the racial domination. So if in the space of being there are kind of mitigation, in the space of not being, there are extraordinary aggravation of violence, and if in the space of being we usually use peace to regulate and solve the conflicts, in the space of not being, we use war, violence, and death. So referring to rights, it is clear that rights are entitled only in the space of being. But no way people living in a not being are entitled to any rights. This will help us in answering the big question I am posing myself since a little bit of time. And my question is, how is it possible that we let people die in the Mediterranean Sea? Well, according to IOM portal of missing migrants from 2014 and 2019, there were more than 13,700 migrants dying in the sea. While the total number of deaths along this route halved between 2017 and 2018, the death rate by number of people attempting the journey increased significantly. So the rate went from 1 death in 38 arrivals in 2017 to 1 in 3 arrivals in the first 4 months of 2019. And added to this, there are all the deaths in the deserts, all the deaths there are not in the sea. So why is this happening? There are possible answers. The possible answers can have, first, we have economic reasons. The disproportionate growth of inequality is a characteristic feature of the current neoliberalism and is one of the main reasons why racism remain a valid device, really well functional to the system. We are assisting extreme forms of inequality that Saskia Sassen defined as form of ejection, form of expulsion, concerning, for example, all the displaced person in the global south, the prison population in the global north, and also refugees rejected at the borders of each country. So today's capitalism presents underground tendencies of expulsion that can no longer be read only as a simple increase in inequality, but that must be understood as a sort of fierce selection from a social point of view. And this is part of the explanation of why we let them die. Because unlike the Keynesian era, when mass production and mass system needed to include the poor and then marginalized in the heart of the economy reality, because the workers and the consumers were needed. Now the capital system doesn't need so much producer and consumers, because the capital is reproducing itself by the financiarization of the system through this sort of magic algorithm that are far away from our understanding. But it is not anymore, the capital is not anymore produced by producer and consumers. So we have a big part of the humanity that has become superfluous. So besides the inclusiveness rhetoric, migration policies now are actually operating by expelling people. Among the ranks of the expelled, there are also the missing migrants, those rejected, even those included in the reception system and then excluded through the denial of refugee status and reduced to illegality. And this is the economic explanation. But we still have to resolve the question on how it is possible that we let people dying from a moral point of view. We could also have the political reasons. If we go back to the European history, we have a lot of examples of how well the scapegoat consensus strategy works in the managing and in calming down potential social conflicts. And this is part of the story. But then again, morally speaking, how we as European public opinion keep silent even if we all know what is happening. Anguillar and Buraski had a very impressive paper on the razzismo democratico e la frontera morales that I invite you to read, because it is exactly explaining the point we are at with this razzismo democratico e la indiferencia della frontera morales. And I think that if we take serious the notion of race, and we look at how race plays a central role in contemporary migration regime, not just in the migration debate, but in the forms of control and security used to govern people on the move, through process of citizenship, rights and settlement, to the lived experience of migrants in the so-called host society. So in addressing this, I think that now we are building a new line of humanity without using race, because we do not allow ourselves to do that, of course. But we use different kinds of categories. The main categories that is used now to define and redefine this line of humanity, dividing the social space of being and non-being, is the notion of irregular migrant, which is legal, an administrative category. It has apparently nothing to deal with the phenotype people, but unsurprisingly, those who are defined irregular migrants are those who are non-white people. But this can't happen just out of nothing. So if we really want to understand why we give such an importance to the category of irregular migrants, with which we divide humanity into those who have rights and those who have not any rights, and so that can die, we have to see, we have to better understand, and we have to go back to the colonial history, where this kind of administrative categories were settled in the managing, in that case, another kind of mobility. In that time, it was us that were moving towards other territories, and in that case, we had to manage our dominion in that territories over that population, implementing an administrative system, a racist administrative system, in order to let us gain the power and the privilege over the colonized population. Nowadays, the irregular migrants cannot claim for anything. They cannot claim for rights because of the guilty of being out of the law, only because he or she is migrating. And let's say that it will be Valentina with her contribution on the colonial Italian history that will allow us to appreciate the genealogic approach, letting us be educated to the fact that what we today are using to oppress people in this very cold way, with legal categories, administrative categories, has a long history in the past. And if we go back to the colonial time, then we see how this was implemented, and how this went to the nowadays situation towards a process of continuity. Michel Foucault said that discourses and practices are like rivers that can, in certain moments, being really turbulent and evident, and in other time they just go under the land and they flow silently and almost not visible, but then they reappear. And this is what we had in our Italian racism history. We started in the colonial time, and then we had this kind of amnesia where during which that is still on, during which racism can really reinforce itself, and then now it is re-emerging with an incredible power. And to conclude, I will quote some ideas coming from this book by Mabling and Turner, published just a few months ago, where these two scholars invite scholars in migration studies to really take seriously the chance, or better to say the responsibility, to use race and racism as central, as core categories in order to understand what is happening nowadays in our realities. And when you start looking at race and racism with this intention, you are immediately forced back to the colonial time. So what Mabling and Turner suggest is that racism is an enduring structural force in the contemporary social world. And I would like to drive your attention on the enduring. It is not ending, but it is long-standing. So it started because it is an historical phenomenon, and it is still ongoing. And we really should at least try to make our best to make it end, as everything that started should have an end at a certain point. Race plays a central role in contemporary migration regimes and the forms of control and security used to govern people on the move. And this is exactly what I have tried to apply in responding the moral question of why we let people die the way we do. And another important point, racism cannot be understood outside of histories of modern colonialism. There are many histories, and every nation state has its own histories. So it's really a responsibility of all of us to go back in our national histories to detect how the story went and how we can explain the present towards a genealogical approach with the past. And for this, race and racism should be central in migration studies to enhance the understanding of rights, denial, injustice, and necropolitics. I conclude here. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guia. I don't know if there are quick questions, or we can go on with Valentina. I think Guia creates a lot of link with the next speech, the speech of Valentina. Valentina Fusari is an assistant professor of population development and migration. She has a postdoc in the Department of Political and Social Sciences at the University of Pavia. And she is graduated in cultural anthropology, but she has a PhD in geopolitics. I want to underline this contamination, cultural contamination about sciences and between point of view and perspectives. I think it's very important. Guia highlight very well the structural dimension, but also the cultural dimension of racism. And Valentina is going to continue this reflection with us, talking about this topic from colonial categories to contemporary stereotypes, Italian racialism and racism in the Horn of Africa. And we move from the present to the past in this oscillation of this movement between present and past, and we hope it could be a contribution to the debate. So, Valentina, you have the floor.
So thank you everybody for inviting me and for organizing this seminar. I think it is a great opportunity for me to tackle this hot topic that in these days is in the newspaper, is in the public debate, but I thank you even more because you give me the opportunity to go back in time and try to trace the long history of Italian racism and try to reconnect what Guia has clearly explained and clarified concerning the today's situation of migrant and irregular migrants in Italy to what happened in our past in the Horn of Africa. So I share my presentation. Okay, why it doesn't give me? I think I have some problem because I can't see the.
I'll do that for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I don't know why I can't see the overview. However, so I think that Italy's colonial adventure, even if it comes late compared to other European countries, played a great pivotal role in making in the making of Italy as a white nation and also in forging the attitude of racism. So what I would like to do today is to propose a long-term perspective and try to map the continuity and recoding of the racist practices and discourses from the past colonial time up to the present. So as this presentation outline revealed, first of all, I would like to just a little bit draft and introduce you with the Italian colonialism in the Horn of Africa and more precisely in Eritrea. And then I will move to three main nodes that are interconnected. The first one is how Italy has been constructed and as a white nation. The second one is the role of colonial racism in constructing Italy as a colonial nation, but at the same time as leaving an important and heavy legacy to today's practices and racism. So, for the sake of time, I limit my analysis to the so-called Colonia Primigenia, that is the first colony that Italia had, and it was in the Horn of Africa, in the Red Sea. No matter at all if you don't know nothing about the Italian colonialism, because not even Italian knows, but so don't worry, I just give you a few coordinates to understand where we are and what we have done there. And why I selected Eritrea? First of all, because it stood as an important social laboratory for the racialization, aimed to build on the one hand a unite Italian identity, and more precisely a white Italian identity, and on the other hand, because of the subordination of the native groups. So This case study allowed me to point out how mobility on the one side and relationality on the other side consolidate and disseminate the racist discourses and practices. As Guia has already underlined, right now we are facing diversity and otherness within our borders, but at that time we were within the borders of someone else, and in that time we move in another place, and we had relation with other people that we consider different from a physical, phenotypical point of view, but even from a cultural and social point of view. So, as I told, just few words about the political, the Italian colonialism. The political framework in which Italian colonialism developed in Africa cover about 80 years. Of course, in these 8 years, we have different stages, different phases, so we have a great matter of temporalities. And these temporalities depend on the perspective we would like to adopt and on what we are looking when we look at the Italian colonialism. In this presentation, I just use the simplest division, that is between the liberal period and the fascist period. And it is important because the most of the public debate try to pinpoint that racism is both just a fascist matter. It isn't true. It is rooted also in the liberal period, despite all the things that we has already underlined concerning the right to an identity, the right to be a nation, and so on. So, we, of course, as I told you, we have other kind of temporalities. I just put two examples here. If we are looking at how schools, that is a tool to Italianize somehow a territory and to Italianize a group or an entire population, we see that Oldelul Kerati Dirar proposed 3 different periods. Instead, if you look at Eritrea as the colonial, as an exploitation colony or as a settlement colony, we have two other periods, as Tekeste Negash says. But as I told, both these periods were characterized by, all these periods were characterized by racism. Because alongside with the military conquest and the action to pacify the occupied territories, the Italians built material and even social infrastructure. Among this social infrastructure, we have, for example, the use of segregationist policies. And these segregationist policies, in the material point of view, are antecedent to the fascist period, because if you go back to the piano regolatore, it means let's say the plan to construct the city of Asmara that was that became the capital city of the colony in 1802. So in the middle of the liberal period, we have a part of the city that was only for Europeans, only for Italian and assimilated people, and the indigenous, the native people should live outside this area. So we can say that Italians anticipated the apartheid that then was so debated in South Africa. And together with this material and social infrastructure, we also have a discourse that imbued all the level of the society in the colony and back to the metropolis, back to Italy. And these are the stereotypes that Italians use to construct their reality there. Today we know that human races do not exist, but we can't deny that racialized group exists. And so what really transformed the social environment and the political environment in the Eritrea colony was the use of this physical and cultural difference that has been transformed in something that is natural, in something that is unbridgeable, some difference that can only be hierarchized, classified, but with clear gaps. They can't come into contact. And it is in these gaps that we can find the colonial roots of today's racist discourse and practices. So the first node, as I told you, it is how Italy became a white nation. Italian colonial ambitions arose right after Italy gained its own independence in 1861, and we were in the high noon of the Italian rule. So when Italian rule over Eritrea started, we were at the zenith of the racial theory in Europe. So the European colonies, from this perspective, came as a privileged point of view to understand how the orders, the technique of control, and most of all the grammar of racial difference were forged and put into place in the colony. The European race science consolidated, in fact, the double binary between dark, it's fair, and civilized, and it's savage. So we have here the roots of the line that we explained before concerning who are the human beings and who are not the human beings. And this difference established also who are at the bottom, who is at the top, and who is at the bottom. At the top, of course, there were the white European people. At the bottom, there was the black African people. So in this descending order has been used to create a governmental tool to keep the order within the colony. Because this was what you can say that it was what allowed Europeans to rule, to govern over other race. It was this idea of progress, to bring people into history, as Africa was the continent without history. So it is a constructed reality, of course, is not true, but it was functional to justify the domination of European countries over other territories. So such assumption and racial hierarchies promoted a self-representation in terms of ethnic belonging. So through the colonialism, through the colonial adventure, we not only racialized the other, but also we racialized ourselves. And it is really important if we consider that we are at the end of the 19th century, because at that time, Italy had two main problems in terms of color. The first one, it was the internal division with the so-called Southern question. The people from the South was looked through an Orientalistic lens. So it was looked through the lens we used to look at people outside Europe. And so they were not considered as white, top-ranking people. At the same time, in the end of 19th century, Italy was an out-migrating country. And most of all, one of the main hosting country was America. And in the United States, Italians were looked at as Mediterranean, non-white people. So somehow the colonialism, the encounter with someone that was so different in terms of phenotypic visibility, in terms of culture, allowed to create a unified image of Italy as a white nation. So together with the mobility outside Italy came a process of racialization. This process of racialization had two different, we can say that it is a process by contrast, and Italian became white by contrast with the colonial territories, not because it was considered as a white country. And we can maybe think that becoming the oppressor somehow delayed the internal division of the people and of the Italian people. And colonialism, both in theory and in practice, was an effective tool to convince people to feel a unite group, but also to feel superior to someone else. And this someone else, our others, were the African population. And this imperative of ruling on someone else pushed people to push the Italian administration to create political and social divide to keep the social order. And it was quite easy in Eritrea, because when we come to the colonial racism and the encounter with otherness, what the Italian administration did is to look at the difference within Eritrea and then adopt that differentiation in order to keep the order and a polarized society in the new territories. In fact, in Eritrea, we have a classification based on the color line that predated the colonial administration. The Orthodox Tigrinya Christians that are living in the, let's say, highlands, the so-called Abesha people, they feel themselves as a different phenotypical and cultural group compared to other groups that are black and that are non-Christian within the territories. So the Italian administration resorted to this division and reorganized the hierarchization within the country. And this organization within the country create a big problem. And this problem was that although they enforced a racial segregation, physical segregation with punishment, because we arrived with the fascist administration that create, we can say that they institutionalized the racism, putting some laws concerning who can these laws forbid the unions within people, forbid Eritreans to enter the areas where European lives except for working, and of course they were menial jobs, and so on. But there was one problem, that as soon as you list these colonized people, colonized subject within a new hierarchy, someone in this hierarchy, and there was the female, the Abeshan women, can be considered not so distant, or they can be considered kind of honorary white women. So the problem came with the encounter, the sexual encounter, the sexual relation between the Italian man and the Eritrean or Ethiopian women. So as soon as Italy created itself as a white nation, another problem arose. And the problem was, these mixed people, are they Italian or not? Are they black Italian or not? And it was not the only problem, because this miscegenation problem, the so-called Metici problem, started at the beginning of the Italian colonialism and overrun the Italian colonialism. What happened is that the access to citizenship changed with fascism. So as soon as we were in the liberal era, these people were black Italian people. As soon as we entered the fascist era, these people could no longer, right after the 1933, can be considered Italian, right, black people. And this mixed people was a problem also in Italy right after the Italian lost its colony in 1941 because of the Allied soldiers, and we have the so-called brown baby in southern Italy. And this brown baby, the babies from the soldier, the American soldier, or the raped people by the North African soldier, were considered Italians, but the phenotypical, the color bar was still there and was a mark of marginalization and isolation, despite their citizenship and socialization. So it was not enough to create a united group of Italian white people. It was not enough to conquer other territories and enforce racial segregation, because right after the Second World War, we have this problem that pop up again in Italy. And in Italy at that time, as Gui has already underlined, we have this, what has been called as a pervasive Italian amnesia. It means that colonialism and the related racism has not been let's say, hot button issue right after the Second World War. We hadn't a discussion about what we have done in our colonies, how we manage the otherness, the diversity of other people. Just it has been hidden, it has been silenced, and until the mid 1960s, nobody tried to disclose our colonial past and try to challenge the idea of Italiani good people, Italians decent people. But at the same time, in my opinion, it's not so correct to say that Italian and Italians did not remember their colonial past, because if you move around in Italy, every square, every city has a name, has something that remained back to our colonial past. In everyday language, we have words that dated back to our colonial adventure. So it's kind of keeping something hidden. It's not totally forgotten, but is a selected memory about our colonial past. And it is through the new mobilities, it is through the reverse mobility, let's say from the colonial, the previous colonial territories, through to the European countries, and in this case through that try to arrive to Italy or pass through Italy. It is through these incoming migration flows that we have a public debate concerning the colonial past and the related colonial race. So it's like a debate that has been postponed, but through the genealogical approach and looking through this enduring racial taxonomy that has been somehow rephrased and refreshed, as Guia has already explained, we have the opportunity to go back to our past and try to reconnect the marginalization and exploitation experienced by the colonial subject, experienced by the mixed people, and try to see if they mirror somehow the experience of today migrants, and more in detail the experience of today migrants from the previous colonial regions. And also if they experience, if I think about the mixed people, the same difficulties or the same challenges that the so-called second or the third generation are experiencing today in Italy and in Europe in general. So concluding, I just to underline once again that yes, today we have racism in Europe, but it is no more allowed to say that it's based on physical difference. It's the so-called racism without race. It's something that is imbricated somehow in everyday lives, is imbricated in the institution, but it's more based on differences in the cultural scale. So we have today people that is uncivilized because it's not part of our culture, not because they are black or yellow or because they are Muslim or something else, at least in theory. And the main important concept that I think we can consider when we would like to trace this long life and die-hard trajectory of the colonial racism is the concept of coloniality. This concept is allow us to move the social structure of the past that has been useful to govern, to keep the order in colony, in today administration and in today systems, the system of power, the knowledge system, all these systems that somehow create a hierarchy, someone that is superior and someone that is inferior. So the coloniality is not linked to time and the place as colonialism. Colonialism is something that we can somehow relate. It's a way to govern over a territory. Coloniality is the mentality that we bring and we take with us. We somehow rephrase, or we can it's dormant and we can somehow reactivate when we come into contact with difference, with the otherness. So I think that in order to analyze together or exploit as much as possible the interconnection between migration studies and colonialism, we have moved towards coloniality. We have to consider coloniality as a pivotal concept to look at mobility and relationalities and categories and all the consequences that this create in today's society, and and how this can be useful for inclusive policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentina. And now we can collect questions, collect reflection. Podemos hablar también en español, en castellano, y comentarios, preguntas, en italiano también. Vamos a traducir. Albert.
Should I start?
Albert, do you have a question or a reflection?
Okay. Thank you very much, Maria Gracia, and thank you, Guya and Valentina. I think that your presentations have been very, very interesting to us and also for the people that are following us, and we really appreciate your cooperation with the project and the effort that you have made to be here today and to make such an interesting presentations. I have one reflection and maybe a question to Guya especially, because she talked about something that I think that is quite important for us. We are working on racism, but also on discrimination in our project. And she said that there is a shift of integration paradigm from institutional goal to a migrant burden. I think that this is a key thing when it comes to discrimination in our European societies. And I think that this connects very well with this idea of the protection of our welfare state, our civilization, our democracy, and to use these needs of protection as excuses for practicing different kinds of violence against migrant people. So I would like to know, because, for example, in Spain, my colleagues, maybe I don't know what they will think about that, but I think that we are in a middle point from this institutional goal of integration to this interpretation about migration as a burden. I think that we are walking towards this migrant burden conception or idea. But I think that we are in a different point, for example, than the Danish society is. I'm studying there, and for example, migration is a burden, clearly, and it's because of that that they need to promote different kind of policies that are quite aggressive for migrant people. And I don't know how is the situation right now in Italy with this new government and with this. It's this very clear in Italy. This idea about migration as a burden, and are the institutions working to promote to some extent the integration and inclusion of these people? Or can you tell us something more about that? Thank you very much, Itoya, and Valentina, of course.
Guya, there is also a reflection on the chat about the demographic rate.
Sorry, let me close the windows, otherwise it's going to be a mess in a while.
The hurricane.
Yeah, it's now coming here. Okay, thanks for your question, Albert. Well, I started reasoning of this shifting of the paradigm when I was analyzing some European Commission files in a previous project funded by DG Home, where I was looking at the policies, and I was very surprised if it is all publicly available. If you go back to those files in the 80s or in the early 90s, the rhetoric of that documents were so much with a long-term view, with lots of positive rhetoric and principles, and then over the years it really fall down into something that we now see in our new Horizon financial framework, Horizon Europe. So it is really, we are really moving slowly but constantly towards a closure of these kind of policies. As it regards the Italian situation, it is absolutely a burden on migrant shoulder integration as it is nowadays. But what it is most impressing is the hyper institutionalization of the reception system. If we make a parallel between the deinstitutionalization of those who are in the mental care system, I'm referring to some very important movement we have in deinstitutionalizing that segregated place for the care of mental health people. Now, in an opposite way, we are progressively institutionalizing the reception of asylum seekers with a de facto excluding system, because we are supposed to provide them services, but in doing this, actually we are parking them aside out of the society, impeding them even to take their own integration burden. So we are really going far on that direction. In Italy now, integration is a burden on migrant shoulders, and we are even implementing systems for not allowing people to have the basic requirements to start this integration process. So it's really tough being a migrant today in Italy. Yes, and I was looking at the chat where there is a question about the racismo democratico. I would suggest those who asked to go back directly to the paper, which is Discriminación, Racismo y Relaciones Interculturales. The title is Racismo Democrático y Fronteras Morales, Cómo construir una ciudadanía insurgente. and probably Maria Jose Aguilar, she's present here, can much better answer.
I
Maria
just
ha
to
messo
share
il link.
the document.
Ok, thank you, Maria. There is other question, other.
I think that Valentina wants to.
Yes, I have a question, or I mean a point that maybe can somehow start a reflection about the paternalist approach. I think this is another risk of legacy from the past time, colonial time. If we move to the how we try to manage undocumented migrants or irregular migrants. In Italy, the most of the irregular migrants are not the new arrived, but are the one that maybe have expired documents. So we are, let's say, creating our own irregular migrants, and we are even creating our own migrants, because the most of the migrants are not migrants in Italy, are just foreign people that are born here. But if you go back to irregular migrants, there is a great debate in these days concerning the paternalist approach. It's like in past we bring people into history and into civilization. Here we take care of you, but you don't have to demand. So the risk is, in my opinion, this you can be included, you can be part of us if you accept without criticizing our superiority, and so you adapt to our culture. There is a recent book that is entitled Decolonizing Anti-Racist Policies, because not even the anti-racist discourse can somehow reconnect or disclose the racist roots within itself. And the last point is the importance of mobility and moving. Guya was saying that today we have the right, the international rights say that, the international laws say that we have the right to migrate. Everybody has the right to migrate. But the problem was not migrate. The problem is immigrate, is settle somewhere. That is the main problem. It's like we allow people to move, but we don't allow people to stay or to settle somehow. And it is the opposite of what happened during the colonial time, because in colonial time, if you were maybe an askari, so you were a colonial subject, you were, I make you move because you could be expendable in a war compared to my Italian citizens. So being subjected to someone else means or not moving or not staying or moving in case of risky situation. So in Libya, we don't send Italian soldiers, we mainly send African soldiers. And for the public opinion, was a great point, this one. Today, for the public opinion, we say that there is an invasion of people that should be on our shoulder, but nobody tried to quantify or contextualize this mobility or irregular mobility or undocumented, and not even challenges why these people are undocumented when they move out of their country.
C'è un'osservazione nella chat. Non so se avete bisogno di traduzione o è chiara.
Traduzione.
Ti traduco? Cioè, il passato coloniale, il legame col razzismo ha senso in Europa, qui si dice, no? Ignacio Ruiz, però non in altri paesi come negli Stati Uniti. Per questo il razzismo non è prima di tutto una questione di discriminazione, che non ha tanto a che vedere con la razza. Di nuovo, insomma, un po' il legame razza-razzismo, non mi è tanto chiara la questione con gli Stati Uniti, però credo che...
If I may, or Valentina, would you like to answer?
Please, and then I can maybe add something.
Okay, thank you. So I would say I've always understand United States as a colonial country because it was first settled as a colonial. So, and that in both Americas, North and South and Central Americas, there was a kind of genocide, epistemicide of the native people living there. Then when we come to the racism we are faced today against the Black people, the African American people, in that case, here again, we have race device operating in relation to a kind of migration. In that case was a forced migration, a sort of mobility from the western part of Africa to not only the United States, but also the other countries in the Americas. So I think that the legacies is still there. And even in that case, we see how race is strong and how the continuity, despite all the anti-racism struggle, is still there nowadays. Through the white supremacy, through the police brutality, and just recalling all the Black Lives Matter movement is struggling against. So I think that the United States are exactly, well, it's a different context. And this is extremely important because we have to be specific when we talk about racism. So we have to be able to highlight and investigate all the specificities in each context. And here again, the context of the southern states of the United States is far different from the northern one. But again, we're talking about racism and race societies. So we have to keep the eye on the context, on the specific histories, who were the perpetrators, who were the victims, how it works, which function was the situated racism played at that time. In that case, in the plantation, it was the main reason was to have the possibility of having a low-cost workforce. Now we are letting them die because we don't need them in terms of human beings. So it's completely different, but the logic again is the same. So it's really an exercise of go into the situated context and detect what's happening there. But I strongly believe that race and racism still are at the core of what we are considering.
Yes, I just add a few words. Race in itself doesn't exist, so I can apply or construct race based on social inequalities. So I can start from social inequalities in order to say, okay, there is a racialized group that can move out of that situation. So when I construct a racialized group based on difference or of discrimination, social inequality. That's why all these studies are mainly comes from feminist studies, from subaltern studies, post-colonial studies. So it's not only race in itself, is how when applies a similar device to differentiate, discriminate. I can start from discrimination to construct a race, or I can start from a race to discriminate a group. So it's really hard to understand this vicious circle. It depends on how far we would like to go and how through which lens we are looking at the phenomenon. And I think that not only situated, but these governmental tools and devices have been also customized in order to work perfectly, to function perfectly in a context where you have to divide, discriminate, and control. We don't have to consider race as something that is unchangeable. It's a porous and mobile device. Just it depends how you like to use it. What is the aim of having a division within a society, and who should be the more exploited ones? I think we can even better consider the United States if we go through the social mobility of these groups connected with the race. How many people from different racialized groups can enter, for example, good university? How many of them can enter a higher position? And the same discussion we can make for women. The ceiling, the glass ceiling is there. It doesn't matter the race, but if we add the race as a factor, we see that how many black women can enter higher position. So it doesn't work alone, of course, but I think it's a heavy tile in the big picture.
If I can add a thought, thinking to the United States, I remember the book, the very famous book, How the Irish Became White. I don't know if you have read it, but this study discussed about the Irish came to America in the 18th century, and they come as oppressed people, as low qualified people, and in the USA they discover a very different form of social hierarchy based on the color line, and so they this book tells the story of how the oppressed people became the oppressor, using using the color, and I think that if we can conclude also this discussion of today, I think that it is very clear that we are discussing, studying, researching processes, and these processes are very negative in some way, but they are construction, socioeconomic, political, cultural construction. And so I think that this interpretation in all the different point of view, perspective, disciplinary or between theory and practice, give us a double image. There are a lot of threats, of menaces, of worries, but there are also possibilities, because we can deconstruct, but also try to show with a lot of evidences that this construction, historical, socio-historical construction. If I can conclude with an image, I don't know if Guya can. I'm not able to share the image about Europe. I started discussing about the process of construction of the whiteness, but also erasure of colors from Africa. This is a journal, an Italian journal of a philosopher, and in the last number of this year, they about diaspora, they use this image. And this image is it's a sort of provocation about the blackness of Europe and the contribution of different kind of people around the world in the construction of Europe. And so I don't know if you recognize someone in these maps. In this map, I don't know. You can try, or I can send you the solution of this this number. For example, in Spain, there is a woman. Do you know what is? This is a provocation, but we have. I think we have to know our history and also the contribution of a lot of perspective people in the construction, also of our knowledge. And so, as a researcher, I think it is my wish. We have the responsibility to contrast also a politic of erasure of the contribution of different people from different countries, from minorities, women, and so on, that contributed a lot also in the construction of values, norms, and tradition of our continent and countries. Thank you. And I think we can close.
Just a word. Thank you, the three speakers. Thank you so much for the three speakers for the wonderful and very interesting speeches. Grazie mille, Giulia, Valentina, María Grazia. Gracias a todos los que habéis asistido también a estos seminarios. Yo creo que hemos cerrado con un broche de oro, con un seminario muy interesante que nos ofrece nuevos puntos de vista dentro del proyecto. Agradecemos muchísimo a las tres ponentes. El año que viene, el curso próximo, en septiembre, continuaremos con los seminarios multiuri y abordaremos nuevos problemas. Muchísimas gracias a todos. Gracias. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.